Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaste. Hello everyone. Welcome again to my NPTEL course on interior design. And today we will be talking about interior design projects, and we'll try to understand how the costing happens and what are the career avenues for interior designers in terms of how they get paid and how they really compute the costing, etc. So just having a look at the keywords, costing and career are like two important keywords over here when we explore this universe of interior design, and we'll see the different methods how this costing is done. For the contents today, I'll be focusing on what is the scope of work, for an interior designer, what are the methods they employ to compute costing, and there could be other considerations and reasons for costing sometimes, what could they be, and how does one communicate with the clientele, how they prepare the client questionnaire, and some references. So to understand the scope of the work that interior design project has or an interior designer has to deliver and be a part of the process, that we can understand, first of all trying to understand like how an interior designer works and what are the subtle nuances of an interior design project versus the other projects like core architectural projects. So when we talk about interior design project, there is a lot of emphasis on the interior spaces and very minute details also, like your fabric selection, your lighting, and your furniture, and of course the structural part also. And each little small detail comes into picture, and therefore interior design projects, they are very extensive in terms of how a detailing is done in a project. All sorts of drawings, different details, and selection of a certain material, fabric, color palette, etc. So it becomes very, very comprehensive in that sense, and there are micro level details which are required in an interior design project. So one has to really start from understanding the site, visiting it, documenting it, and then your discussions with client, interactions, then preparing a design brief based on those interactions, and then your 2D expressions, 3D conceptualization and visualization, so that these discussions with your clientele and with your team and expressing your idea becomes very professional and also comprehensible. And then there are like proper working drawings which are required, just like any other core architecture project also. So what are the working drawings and how each little detail will be done, those kinds of details. And then the entire execution on site, if there are some revisions, some modifications, those have to be understood. There is this entire delivery and then the final handover and everything. So this all comes within the scope of the interior design project. And of course, there are intermediary spaces and intermediary steps in between this also, based on what is the involvement of a designer and how much responsibility a certain client has assigned to the designer, and in what capacity they are involving them at every stage or step. So it's very, very important. And yeah, so interior designer could limit themselves and just give the overall concept or some drawings, and the execution is done by someone else. But they could also do the overall execution and implementation of the project and give it like a complete solution to the client, from conceptualization to the drawings to the execution on site, and just like ready to walk in apartment or interior design project of other kind of typology. All that is possible depending on what the discussions are and how the scope of work has been laid and in what capacity a designer, interior designer is employed. So, I mean, the clients, they want a very hassle-free experience. For them, it is always more catchy, and it's more interesting that the entire supervision on site to the procurement of materials, furniture, all sorts of installation and your final decor, everything is done by the designer and they are just given the entire project, from scratch to the end. That is very, very important because many clientele, like they are, we are all leading a very busy life and everyone is busy, and sometimes it may not be possible for them to see everything and pick up furniture and upholstery and different kinds of other kinds of products, also decor objects. So they just give this responsibility to the designer and the designer takes care of everything, of course, in consultations with the client. That is how it happens. So when we talk about all this hassle-free experience, all this scope, all the tasks the designer has to undergo, we also have to understand, how much does an interior designer charge? And it varies based on the tasks and the services that we were talking about, and what all comes under his scope. So there are different methods to compute interior design projects costing, which we also talked a bit in the previous slides, like what could be the scope of work and what all could fall apart of this costing scheme. So these different ways, a designer can compute the cost by employing an hourly cost, or there could be like a percentage cost, there is a per square feet cost, something called as markup on product cost, and there is also a lump sum fees. So these are some broad methods to compute the cost. So if we talk about hourly cost, it is usually for smaller projects, which are like quite small and maybe just sometimes one room or like a kid's nursery or, something which is on a very smaller scale. And it pays the designer based on the actual amount of time that they have contributed. Sometimes there may be a very little scope of work, and based on the time that they have given and the very little scope that is defined, they are paid accordingly. And it could vary in case of India anywhere from 10 rupees to 100 rupees per square feet, depending on what is the level of detailing and what is the scope, what all is a designer bringing to the table. And then there is a percentage cost, which is usually for larger projects and where the scope of work is slightly elaborate. And basically, there is this total cost of the project and the interior designer gets a certain percentage as a design fee. So it's usually 10 to 15%, but it could also shoot up to 20% if there is a very, very customized design and there is a high level of experience and expertise that the interior designer brings to the project. So for example, let's say a place like Dehradun, which is the capital city of Uttarakhand, and the designer is working on a project whose total cost is like 35 lakhs, and which is sort of calculated depending on the scope of the work. And if the designer is working on market ready standard designs, the fee could be as less as 10%. And if the designer is really bringing some customized designs, keeping in mind the context of Uttarakhand, bringing some customization, employing the local materials, like ringal, which is a species of a bamboo, or doing something which is very, very innate to the identity of the place and bringing some local makers into the ecosystem. So based on that customization, identity creation, and the comprehensive details that the designer wishes to bring into the project, the fee could be as high as 15% or even 20%. So a little bit negotiation is also, sometimes it plays a role in getting the total fees. Then there is a per square feet, which is a simple sort of formula based method that you have a certain square feet area of the project and there is sort of fixed amount. So it usually ranges 40 rupees per square feet to 100 rupees per square feet. This is usually for only design and not execution, and this range also showcases again the level of detailing and the scope of work, and again what is the experience and expertise, and if there is something very, very unique that comes into play while designing and executing the project. So this entire range varies, and however, inclusive of products, carpentry, something like a modular kitchen, and wardrobes, flooring and ceiling. So if we have all of these included, it can also shoot up even 2,000 to 5,000, and sometimes even more per square feet. Because if we are bringing more carpentry skills, and if there is the design of a modular kitchen which is required, and customized flooring, ceiling, so all of these detailed scope of work would, lead to the rise in the fee of the designer as well. And this is generally followed in commercial spaces where there are like very fixed prices per square feet, so that there is smooth functioning of the project and there is no conflict or confusion, and where the scope of work is very extensively defined in written, like on a contract. So this is a hassle free method. Then there is a cost plus or markup on products method. And basically what happens that the designer charges a premium on every product that is incorporated within the design, and where he is giving his or her services in procuring those products or designs or furniture pieces. So let's say if there is a sofa and its cost price is say 20,000, and there are more products and furniture pieces like this which the designer tries to procure for the client and sort of creates this kind of curated experience, the designer would charge some price as a markup. So for 20,000 it could be like 22,000, so there is this 2,000 markup. So it varies from project to project how many products are being procured, where all the services are hired, and what is the entire scope. So it is somewhat traditional method and many people still use it. And basically the design purchases that happen for that project are all the responsibility of the designer. So that's why they ask for this markup on products fee. And like furnishings and accessories and light fixtures, some of these kinds of interesting details in interior design project, these could demand certain attention from the designer, and the clientele would need their support and their experience in procuring and curating these products. So there is a role of designer, and therefore the designer gets paid accordingly. But having said that, there is of course the possibility of customizing and designing those products and furniture items and decor objects on your own as a designer. And that customization and then designing your own range of furniture and own accessories and light fixtures, that would of course be another game altogether, because that's not just assembling or curating the products which already exist, but it's designing from a scratch depending on your site, the client's taste, and the kind of space, what is the typology of the project, etc. For example, let's take a scenario. If there is a consultation with the designer on a bedroom design project, so there will basically be an agreement, where the terms and conditions will be laid down, like what are the products to be procured for designing the bedroom, and what are the kinds of furniture pieces, or what is the bedroom design, and what is the bed design. All of these products which are procured and curated, there will always be this agreement in place, and it could be like 20% markup on goods purchased from a wholesale distributor. So these kinds of costing methods are also employed while working on small projects like a bedroom design project. And the budget will include the flat design fee, materials, vendors, and contractors who will be working on the site for executing the project. And then there is this lump sum or fixed or flat fee, whereas like it is based on a designer's discretion, like what is the sort of percentage or commission per square feet, or a combination of two or more categories. So lump sum for this kind of a project based on the designer's time, it's the designer's inputs and the area. There could be like a lump sum cost in terms of like how many lakhs for a small project or slightly bigger project. And usually there is no transparency over here, because it's designer's discretion and the negotiation that happens with the client. And these are still used sometimes when there is also a sort of a prior experience, and where some kinds of projects like this have happened in the past between the designer and the same client, and they are more or less aware of the time taken by the designer and the vocabulary that the designer brings to the project and the certain scale that is being achieved. So usually for a large job, where the scale is more, this can be adopted as a method of computing cost, because it provides the designer with a very streamlined method of billing, for the work that has to be done. and it covers all expenses that include everything from design and layout through the final installation process. Now again, if we take the scenario which is like same the bedroom design project, there would be again agreement, and there would be terms and conditions laid out. There will be costs per service that would be laid out. There could also be something like a retainer amount or a retainer fee, that because you are charging flat or lump sum, before starting the project there could be some retainer amount that could be given to the designer, and the rest after executing the project. And also there are services which are laid down for the designer to incorporate while computing the cost, like color selection or purchasing products and so on. So this budget will include all the services that are being talked about here. There are sometimes few other considerations that add up and increase the cost and may lead to certain methods of cost addition or sometimes also reduction. So those considerations have to be kept in mind. Materials are very, very important when we talk about cost of an interior design project. So how are materials procured, from where they are procured? If the designer has right connections in the industry and they have like good quality materials but on reasonable prices, it is like a very effective way of managing your project and not really shooting the cost. And also materials, it's very important to keep a check on the quality of the materials. So the clientele usually want themselves to select the materials or rely on designers, and do not generally give it to the contractors or other people on the site until and unless they have certain degree of trust and they have worked with them before. So the materials play a very, very important role in computing the overall cost of an interior design project. Also the karigars who work on the site, what are their costs and what is their prior experience. And sometimes you have to pay them like on a daily basis as daily wages. Sometimes it could be at certain stages in a project, stage wise payment. But many of these karigars also expect daily wages, because they need these daily wages to really take care of their daily expenses. So there are some examples that one could follow, whether in India or also abroad. There is this range of price that we could see for a single room, or for the second room in the same property. If you design, it could be slightly lesser because you have worked for the same client on another room. So all these negotiations and all this sort of trust related discounts and all those things are possible. So if you have already a trust and you have worked on a single property, single room, and you're working on the same property on the second room, then there would be a possibility that your charges would be less than the first time. And there are some considerations from the point of view of clientele. So making changes, or you are delaying the project, or you are deciding to abruptly expand the scope without involving the client. So the designer has to be very, very sensitive and do things responsibly, because delays and expansion of scope could increase the price of the project. So one has to be very careful about it. And the smartest way is to meet few designers, see their portfolios, discuss your project, see their design briefs, and then after hearing their thoughts, you just request for a bid, and then you sort of wait until there are 3 candidates from which you could choose. So it is like a smart and very, very effective method of choosing a designer and then computing the cost of the project. So I was talking about a retainer fee, just gave you a very subtle introduction to that. So many professionals require their client to pay a retainer fee, which is like, a percentage of the total estimated budget, and it's taken at the start of the project and so on. And it is advisable, to put a contract in place, and it protects both parties, and all the terms and conditions are laid down, very, very clearly. And also, there are stages like I was talking about within an interior design project, and it's very, very important to keep a track of those stages, because in a timely fashion, if you achieve certain stages within a project, then your budgetary concerns can be addressed, rather than having an overall shoot up in the cost and then just messing up the timeline. So all these are important aspects while working on an interior design project and computing the overall cost. And if there are subcontractors or there are junior designers who are working with a designer, it's also important to, note down in the contracts their role, their schedule, what are their prices, keeping everything in written, what is the scope and where the people are really contributing at what stage. And also, like many other household contractors, however, any interior decorator should be willing to provide customers with references. So, once you have a good experience, you have context, it's always nice to provide references. And it's good to, work in as a team. And then, because there are lots of perennial interior design projects where all these teammates and all these stakeholders would be required for smooth functioning and execution of a project. If we talk about the career and salary of an interior designer, there are some examples and some cases that could be referred to. So there are some popular companies. If we, look at the interior design market, there is Interior Design Group, there is IKEA, there are Interior Concepts, and there is Gensler. So these different companies, depending on what kinds of manufacturing processes they employ and what kinds of products, they create, whether it is customized or mass produced, whether it is just do it yourself assembly or the complete sort of turnkey solution. Depending on that, there is this high range that we see in, salaries. And these are annual salaries, which you can see on the screen. So there is this wide range. So we were talking about a few companies and we were seeing at these different ranges, how they offer salaries. It also depends in which city the project is being executed and where the designer is working, whether it's Mumbai or Delhi versus Chennai. So all of these also have a great impact in deciding what are the salaries for interior designers. And we are talking about the annual salaries here, what are listed. So we also see, as per the experience level of the designer, whether it is an entry level, less than 1 year experience, or it is like, an early career designer, 1 to 4 years of experience. And then based on that experience and exposure, of course, there will be difference in the level of salaries which are paid to these designers. And that's how the market operates and decides the salaries. There is mid-career interior designer, 5 to 9 years of experience, and then their average annual salary would be, of course, more than what we saw on the previous slide. And then there is this experienced interior designer who has anywhere more than 10 years of experience, and that somewhere gives this kind of a decent salary. So it is a very, very professional, cutthroat, and difficult and challenging field, but with the level of exposure and experience, as you go higher in terms of experience and you get more technical in your work and you are able to deliver better, you are more professional, the salary also increases. So this is a sort of inventory or chart, and this would help understand also, the employees with interior designers in their job title in Hyderabad versus Andhra Pradesh and so on. So it's basically based on the location also, what is the pay difference. There is more pay difference by location if we talk about metro cities like New Delhi, Bangalore, etc., and versus Chennai, Tamil Nadu, and so on. And there are lots of career paths for interior designers. You could be the main designer, you could be the facilitator, you could be somebody who is just managing the site or just doing the supervision. So there are lots of roles and there are lots of stakeholders who come in this value chain, and it's possible to work in varied capacities and in varied roles. So also there is this old matrix where we see designer communicating with the client and the value chain is sort of smaller and the stakeholders are less, compared to what is the new dynamics and new matrix where there are lots of sort of crisscross connections and this elaborate value chain, and before directly going to the client there are lots of other steps that happen. So it depends on the clientele and the designers which kind of matrix they want to employ and what is their experience and trust level. So that flexibility exists. It's also sometimes important to create a client questionnaire, and this is the case of a residential project that you see over here. So, very simple questions. What is the Vastu compliance? What is their overall budget? Their personality traits, personal information, what kinds of spaces do they like? What are the themes that they like, the kind of music, and whether it is like, open floor plan or with partitions, etc. And with these kinds of questions, the designer gets to know the client and then the design could be done. So I would just like to summarize with this quote, which is given by Scott Adams. Creativity is allowing yourself to make mistakes. Design is knowing which ones to keep. I find it very, very interesting. So we will next talk about some case studies and examples. These are some references that will come handy. Thank you.